Good morning. So here we are. It is Friday the 13th in the year 2020. If that doesn't concern you at least a little bit, you might have been sleeping through most of this year. So let's see what we can do to improve today. And what we're going to be doing here in class in biology is we are going to be advancing a little bit from here. All right, diffusion is what we have worked on for this whole week. Today I want to introduce another term that goes right along with that. But first, can we answer a simple question? Can you figure out the answer to this? This comes directly from one of our Regents exams, which is the big test you have to take at the end of the year. The question reads, the diagram below represents the results of the net movement of a specific kind of molecule across a living cell membrane. The movement of molecules from side A to side B is an example of. So from A to B, here is A, here are your molecules, here is B, here are those molecules. So if the molecules move from A to B, so they are moving from the left side to the right side, is that active transport, chromatography, cellular respiration, or diffusion? Now, hopefully, you remember our basic rule for diffusion. Diffusion is going to be a form of passive transport that moves things from a high concentration to a low concentration. So, with that said, let's take a look at this question. A has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. It has 8 molecules. B has 1, 2, 3. A is high concentration because it has more. B is low concentration because it has less. And therefore, the molecules, if they move from A to B, will be diffusion. Movement from a high concentration to a low concentration. That downhill roll. All right, so that's nice. But let's get into why we're here today. All right, and this is to talk about the concept of osmosis. Now, osmosis is literally just the diffusion of water. All the same rules, all the same things. Anything that's true about diffusion is true about osmosis. The only difference is that because water is such an important molecule for all life, we wanted a separate way for us to refer to it. Because the movement of water can be the difference between life or death, we didn't want to confuse it with just diffusion, which can be anything. So understand, osmosis and diffusion are the same thing. It's just osmosis is based on water and how is water moving. So here we see that on one side, all of these are water molecules. We have 7 on the left, 1 on the right. So they're going to move here to the right, over to this side, try to even out from high concentration to low concentration. Now we're going to have 3 different types of osmotic pressure that you need to know. Now each one of these is really, look at the prefix. By now, hopefully you have noticed the trend that the prefix is unbelievably important in biology. It always means something for our terms. So hypertonic, saying that the water concentration inside the cell is higher than outside the cell. More water inside, less water outside. Hyper, if somebody is hyperactive, it means they are more active than normal. If a spaceship has hyperdrive, it means it goes faster, more fast than normal drive, right? So hyper, that prefix, means more or above. So hypertonic makes sense. It is more water. The cell has more water, so the water will leave the cell. high concentration to low concentration. Isotonic. All right, iso means same. And that one's going to be easily the hardest one to remember. So I would even argue don't worry too much about it just yet. We'll get there. Through practice and repetition, you'll understand it. But in this case, the water levels are the same. So there's going to be no real change. And then finally, hypotonic. Hypertonic is more. So without even reading, you could probably guess what hypotonic means. And this one makes sense too. If you need to get blood drawn, right, they're going to take their needly thing and they're going to stick it into your arm in order to get a vein. Why? What kind of needle is that called? It's called a hypodermic needle. Well, hypo means less. If hyper is more, hypo is less or under. So a hypodermic needle goes under the skin in order to deliver medication or get blood or whatever. So these things make sense. Hypothermia. We're going into winter time now. If you get hypothermia, you have below normal temperature. So just remember these two. Hyper is more, hypo is less. And if a cell has less water, that means water will now move into the cell. So in our hypertonic example, we take a look at the cell in green. The surrounding environment has 3 waters. Water will leave that cell, causing it to shrink or collapse. In isotonic, inside the cell has 5. Outside the cell has 5. And so there's no real change. Things may move around a little bit, but water's not really going anywhere. Hypotonic. Now we see that inside the cell has very few water. Outside the cell has a lot of water, and therefore water is going to move into the cell. Now, in the case of us, animal cells, that can cause the cells to explode. That could be really bad for us. Interesting side note, that's one of the reasons that serial killers like to dump bodies into rivers. They break down faster. There's less evidence left behind because if the killer were to leave their own DNA behind, their cells would swell and burst in that water, and then there's no more DNA because it's spilled out places. The body starts to decay fast. Sorry, I teach forensics. So now this is what it looks like for human red blood cells. So here's our hypertonic, and we see that because it is hypertonic, water has left those red blood cells. They've shriveled up. If you dehydrate something, you are effectively creating a hypertonic environment, and it pulls the water out. If you've ever made jerky, you take the meat strips and you put them in a food dehydrator, and what that does is it surrounds them with dry, hot air, and the water gets pulled out because the air has no water, but the cell has a lot of water, and it shrivels up. Isotonic. This is what we want. This is how your body maintains. This is homeostasis, and that is the same. So everything's healthy in the way it should be. There's no real difference. Some water moves in, some water moves out, but everything stays nicely balanced. And then finally, that hypotonic. So in this situation, more water outside, less water inside, so water moves into the red blood cells. In our case, that will cause them to swell, and eventually, if there is not relief, they can explode, like you see happening right here. And that will kill your cells. So let's take a look at some examples of where we see this happen. That's just the rundown. So, alongside winter roads, all those bushes and stuff that always get planted there look like this by the time the snow starts to melt away. Yellowed, ugly. Why? Think about what's happening to that road during the winter that isn't happening to it during the summer, the spring, or the fall. If you look closely, you can see it. And it's not the snow. all of these little white crystals that you see. We salt roads in the winter. The salt helps the snow and ice to melt, but it also creates which one of these three environments? There go the lights in the room because, of course. So adding a bunch of salt water around here, is that going to create a situation where the plant and the surrounding have the same amount of water? The plant has less water, or the plant has more water when you surround it with salty water? Well, it has less. This is a hypertonic environment. And so it pulls the moisture out of those plants, killing them. Now, we see the same kind of thing happen at movie theaters. If you can manipulate the biology, you can make billions of dollars. Look at the fast food industry. It is entirely based around manipulating our biology. It knows how we will respond to high fat, high sugar foods. And they manipulate that. They know that they can get people addicted to it. Sugar is more addictive right now than heroin, I think was the last study, and cocaine. It is unbelievably powerful. And here we see another use of biology with movie theaters. If you've ever noticed, these prices are crazy. Absolutely crazy for what you're getting. But they know you're going to buy popcorn. Popcorn's pretty much the basic. More people will buy popcorn than people who will not. And that popcorn creates a hypertonic situation in your mouth. It's very dry, it's very salty. So as you eat it and chew on it, water is pulled out of your mouth cells and into the dry, salty popcorn. Well, as your body loses water, as you just grab handful after handful of that and just shovel it into your maw like some sort of crazed beast. That's me. I do that. You get thirsty because now you are losing water. Your body is recognizing that. It's signaling thirst because your water level is starting to drop. So, of course, these super expensive sodas are then introduced because soda is cheap. They make a lot of money off selling soda. And boy, aren't you thirsty now that you ate all that popcorn? This is a regular thing, and it happens all the time. This is how osmosis works and how it can be manipulated and used. So when we think of passive transport and diffusion, you should also now be thinking of osmosis. Just that process with the water moving. Next week, we hit our first state lab. That state lab is based entirely off diffusion and osmosis. So, ladies and gentlemen, I hope to see you there. It's going to be a big lab. Please make it if you at all can, because making it up outside of class is nigh impossible. Ladies and gentlemen, have a great weekend, and I hope this Friday the 13th sees us through completely unaffected. Yeah, right, like that'll happen in 2020.